call this the UK approach to preparing second generation national annexes, and I'm not going to talk about UK choices for Eurocode 7, the technical stuff. I'm really just going to talk about the process of how we're putting our national annexes together, and I'm also going to talk about it from a general point of view, not just a Eurocode 7 point of view, from all of the Eurocodes, because we're trying to get a consistent approach in the UK. This diagram illustrates the current situation in the UK with regard to the status of the Eurocodes. So at the top in blue, we've got Eurocode 7 Part 1 and 2 with the old titles, or the current titles I should say. And then under that we've got national annexes to those two documents. And those national annexes are relatively short documents which just address the matters that need addressing in the Eurocode. They don't add a lot of extra information. They're really supplements to the Eurocode themselves. And one of the things that those national annexes do is they make reference to what was called non-contradictory complementary information, NCCI. You may have heard those initials. And that complementary information is currently held in other British standards, and I've got a selection of British standards there in red. Many of those, when the first generation Eurocode came out, needed to be rewritten to go over to a partial factor system. Some of them were still lump factor. Some of them were very old codes anyway, and they needed updating. Some were temporarily withdrawn, the foundations and the retaining walls codes. I think the retaining walls code was temporarily withdrawn and then reissued. So we had to do quite a bit of work to make those British standards conform to what the Eurocode was saying. Because remember, of course, the Eurocode in the UK is a British standard, so it has the same status. The other things that we refer to in the national annexes are published documents, which are a new type of document that BSI produce. I'm not sure if they're going to continue doing this. These were basically documents that were fast-tracked through the process. So they didn't take so long to develop. They were often sponsored by major clients. In this particular case, it was our highways agency, who wanted to get some of their regulations into some national document, and they paid for the work. It was done, it had a short review period and was published. But it wasn't given the status of a British standard. It was called a published document, and a published document doesn't mean anything. So for us, it's been a bit confusing as to the status of that. And then to the right, we've got what I call de facto standards, things that we follow which aren't produced by British standards. So building regulations, so these are regulations that we have to follow for all buildings. They're very high level, they're very vague in terms of detail, but you have to follow them. And then various highways agency documents, manuals for roads and bridges, very practical documents that are used heavily, but because of government cuts, they don't want to continue maintaining these, so they're trying to withdraw this and defer to the Eurocodes as much as possible. And then down at the bottom, an example of a SIRIA document. SIRIA is a separate industry-wide publishing organisation that produces guides on various subjects, and it's produced a lot of subject guides for geotechnics. The embedded retaining wall guide is probably its most famous, I would think, in our field, and we refer to that in our national annex as well. So we're giving those other documents sort of an extra status by referring to them in the national annex. So that's the current situation. Now, with regard to the national annexes, when we came to start to prepare for the second generation, the first thing we realised was that the format of our existing national annexes across concrete, steel, basis of design, geotechnics, etc., completely all over the place. So on the left we've got an extract from Eurocode 7 Part 1 National Annexes, tabular, the subclause number, the feature, and what the provision of the National Annex tells you to do. And on the right you've got something from Eurocode 3 presented in a completely different way. And this is just two examples. If I'd have gone through all the other ones, I'd have had 5 or 6 different examples of a completely different way of presenting things. Now, in real life, designers are working with all these documents, you know, so you're going from one to the other. One of the big complaints was, why is everything so inconsistent? And it was one of the criticisms of the Eurocodes, indeed, and one of the things we've tried to put right in the second generation of Eurocodes. So this is something we didn't want to repeat. Of course, the problem with this is, do we bow to the steel guys and say, okay, we'll follow your format, or do they bow to us, which they almost certainly won't, and go to the one on the left? So part of the problem is a little bit of turf warfare as well. That's not moving on. Right, what's going on there? Okay, so the first thing, so what BSI did was they set up a sort of a high-level committee called the ESSG, which was a Eurocode strategy group. And our task was to come up with a set of rules that all of the subcommittees, structural and geotechnical, will follow in preparing their national annexes. And for those of you who are involved in EC7, you've probably heard us talk about N1250 policy guidelines, a very long and tedious document which sets out the rules for the Eurocodes. And all of the Eurocodes, second generation Eurocodes, have been prepared supposedly to that document. And it's brought a level of consistency across the Eurocode. So if you go to Eurocode 3 or Eurocode 2, you'll find very similar main headings, you'll find very similar layout, very similar presentation. We've tried to get that consistency and signposting between the Eurocodes. And we decided in the UK to do a similar thing, but with a much slimmer document. So we produced our guideline or guidance to the UK national annexes, setting out basic rules that all of the subcommittees would follow. So that's what we've done. We've produced that document, and I'm sure if anybody on any other national committee wants to see that, I'm sure that will be made available for people to see what's in there. That's not working. Let's go on there. Now, in terms of what goes in the national annex, with the first generation, the rules for this were set out in something called Guidance Paper L, which is part of the European Union's documentation, and it was something that we followed. There were 5 things that were allowed to put in a national annex. The first one on the left was the nationally determined parameters, so values of the partial factors, national choices, etc. The second one was country-specific data, which would be things like wind maps particular to your geography. On the right, procedure to be used, where there are alternative options. So in the current Eurocode, design approaches 1, 2 and 3 would be covered by that. But also in masonry, for example, there are 6 classes of masonry design. So again, lots of other standards having different procedures. And then guidance on the informative annexes, which ones you should use, which ones you shouldn't use. And at the top, reference to non-contradictory complementary information. Now, for the second generation, we decided that the UK national annexes would strictly be limited to providing national choice for NDPs. I know that some countries in their current national annexes have got a lot of additional information which is in the national annex. Others have got very thin national annexes which refer out. And we're basically sticking with that model. But we are going to allow more complementary information to be included in the national annex. So at the moment, we only refer out to other documents. Now we're going to allow us to provide some clarity within the national annex itself, but on a limited basis. We don't want a 200, 300 page document. We want a relatively short document, but where we can add some clarity, and that will probably be dealing with things that are ambiguous in Eurocode 7, in our case, we will provide that in the national annex. So the things that we are going to provide in our national annex, if I go back, are the values and or classes where alternatives are given in the Eurocode, the values to be used where a symbol only is given in the Eurocode, the country-specific data, geographical, geological, climatic, etc., and procedure to be used where choice is given in the Eurocode. So very much we're looking in the Eurocode for the hints of what we should be providing. So the contents of our national annex will all follow this top level heading. There'll be a forward, there'll be a scope, And then the main part of the document will be the nationally determined parameters. There'll then be a section dealing with decisions on the informative annexes. And if there is complementary information, we'll put that in under NA4. And then finally, there'll be a bibliography. So all our national annexes will have that same format. The forward, not very interesting, but there were one or two things I wanted to point out that we've actually included in there. So this is just an extract from it. We've felt it necessary to make it clear that the national annex cannot be used by itself. That may seem obvious, but it's something we felt we needed to say. And also, it is only to be used with the current version of the Eurocode. And this is an extract from our draft national annex for Eurocode 7 Part 2. Because one of the problems that we've had is the worry that people would use the national annex from the first Eurocode with the second Eurocode. And how do you stop that? It's all about the messaging. Now, we wouldn't do that, but how do you know what general practitioners who've not been involved, how will they pick up the documents? So we felt it was important to make these statements so people are clear what this document goes with. Because certainly BSI will be selling these documents separately from each other. So you won't necessarily get them, you'll get them as a bundle if you want, but you'll be able to get them separately. So there is a little bit of a problem there. And also we've made it clear that this national, the purpose of it is to contain the national choices to be used for buildings and civil engineering works constructed in the UK. So this applies to anything that's constructed in the UK. The scope that we have also is very, very bare. It mainly repeats what is given in Eurocode 7 itself. So there's a list of the clauses where there are nationally determined parameters. So this is the one for Eurocode 7 Part 2. So there's only 2 nationally determined parameters. And a list of the annexes where we have to make some choice. Now, for Eurocode 7 Part 1, I counted there are actually 100 nationally determined parameters. So the list, if you imagine if I did this for Eurocode 7 Part 1, this would be a long list of those clause numbers. But that's just literally taken out of the Eurocode 7. It's repeating what's given in there. So the main part and the important part of the national annex is going to be covered in the next couple of slides. So one of the things we have to do with national choice is confirm or override the default value that's given in the code. So most of the national choices in the Eurocodes, there is a default choice. There's a few places where we give an opening to information being given in the national annex. Arguably, we didn't need to do that because you've always got that opening, but we have explicitly done that in places in Eurocode 7. So the way that we're dealing with the different ways, combinations you could do things, is if we are going to take the default choice, we're just going to put the statement, the default choice shall be used. And that's it. So you'll need to know what the code is, what the code's saying. Now, in order to get to the right place of the Eurocode, we are including the Eurocode clause number, and we're adding a descriptive title. Now, we've had to come up with this because obviously each clause doesn't have its own title, each paragraph, sorry, doesn't have its own title. So we've come up with a brief heading to explain what the contents of that is, and then we're giving you the decision. It won't be highlighted in yellow, just for this slide. Now, BSI have also insisted that each one of these decisions has its own unique BSI number. And so this is decision NA2.1, this is NA2.4, there are other ones which I've missed out here, hence the numbering isn't chronological. So each one is uniquely numbered. Now, I wasn't a fan of that. I didn't actually see the need for this at all, because really, as a designer, I'm only interested in that. But that was one of the things that BSI insisted on, and we've had to go along with. So, if we are accepting the default choice, we're going to instruct you to use it. And we are repeating the definition of shall, should, may, and can, which appears in the Eurocodes. We're repeating that in the forward to the national annex so people know what we mean by those verbs. Where there are openings given in the Eurocode for additional information to be given, so design measures to enhance robustness, we are not adding any additional information, so we've just said no design measures are defined. Okay. Where in some places we have the complication that we have more than one NDP under a paragraph. Remember, the NDPs are given in notes, and some notes have more than one NDP in them, and some notes have NDPs and some don't. So we've had to deal with that under the same heading number. The default choice in note 1 shall be used, and for note 2 the value of the consequence factor shall be 1, and then there's a little bit of explanation. KR is not used in the UK because by setting it to 1 it sort of disappears. So we are having to explicitly call up which note and therefore which NDP we're referring to. And then at the bottom, the final thing is where we're negating something. Prescriptive rules shall not be used for verification of limit states for GC2 or GC3 geotechnical structures. That's how we will tell you not to do something. So very much using the verb shall with all these instructions. So that's confirming and overriding default choices. A lot of our NDPs are also in tables, and what we've decided here is where we want to make a change to the table, we're going to replace the table. We did think about providing sort of, change this value in this cell, but we felt that was too complicated. So we are literally going to reproduce the table with our changes embedded in it. And I can't remember off the top of my head what we've changed here, but I think we've added a couple of rows in. So what we're going to say here is values for X max for structures in Geotechnical category 2 shall be as given in table NA plus 1, and table NA plus 1 is a replacement for table H1 in the code. So hopefully users will just see that table and say, I use that table, I ignore the other table. So that's the way that we're dealing with all of the tables. And that's basically the combinations that you've got in the main text. So it's a fairly simple number of choices to make. When it comes to the informative annexes, it's a little bit trickier than I was expecting. As you know, most of our annexes are informative, and we have the option to make them normative, we've got the option to keep them informative, and we've got the option to cancel them completely or replace them. So there's actually 4 options. So the first one is where we've decided to replace an annex. So in Eurocode 7 Part 2 for the ground investigation report, we've said that Annex A shall not be used. Annex NA.A shall be used in place of Annex A. It's a bit of a mouthful, but effectively we're replacing the annex in the Eurocode with the annex that is going to be attached in the National Annex. Now, we've not actually made many changes to this. We've added a few words in, we've had very minimal changes, and I'll show you the alternative. So we had this dilemma: do we repeat the whole of the annex? It's, I don't know, 5 or 6 pages for the small number of changes that we want to make, and we've decided to do that. I'll show you what the alternative is in a moment, but that's the way that we've done it. So we're going to replace the whole of the annex, and we're going to add in our bits and pieces that we wanted to do there. For many of the other annexes, we're either going to say you may use it, we're leaving it open to the engineer, or we're going to tell you you've got to use it, shall be used. When we get to part 3, it's possible we might say shall not be used. I doubt if we will say shall not be used. I think in all cases we will, well, apart from replace it, I doubt we will say don't use this annex and we're not giving you a replacement. I think nearly always we're going to give a replacement. Even if we want to cancel part of the annex, we'll replace it. So that's the annex. Now, what was that alternative? Well, the first alternative for this particular annex was to have a list of changes. But we realised that doing like this, it looks like, oh, there's a hell of a lot of mistakes here. So we thought from a selling point of view to the general public, this is not good. We've published a Eurocode, and the first thing we've done is come up with a long list of errors that have got things that will be changed. We thought that was a bad way of presenting it. So we decided this was not the way to go. even though these changes are pretty minor. We are keeping references to complementary information, so we're going to have all those references out to other British standards where they are relevant to this particular subject, so these are all the ground investigation ones, and we will probably keep the references out to the de facto standards as well. And we will also then have a separate bibliography. So this list will be references to documents that we are mentioning in the National Annex. So things that are specifically called up somewhere. And then this list will be other useful information that we may not have directly referenced. So for example, the Institution of Civil Engineers Manual of Geotechnical Engineering, we're making a reference to that because there's quite useful information, not specifically Eurocode related, but we want people to be aware of that. And obviously we're referring across to the other Eurocodes as well. So that's it, that's what we're doing. In terms of timetable, yesterday somebody made a statement that we won't be bringing the Eurocodes into 2028. That's not going to be the case in the UK. This is the timeline from last year through to 2020, April 2028, I think that is. Yep. And you can see what's been published. So we've already got the Masonry Code, BS EN 1996-1, that was published in 2022. We've got the Steel Code, we've got the Concrete Code, and we've got EN 1990, the basis of design. Remember, what's coming is a splitting of that into two parts, new structures and existing structures. That hasn't gone ahead yet. So this is what is available today. And as of earlier this month, last month, we had Eurocode 7 Part 1 and Eurocode 7 Part 2 were published. So they now are British standards, albeit without a national annex. And so the FPR versions effectively are cancelled now. They've been replaced for the full standards. And as Adrian mentioned, the formal vote on Part 3 is about to get underway. In fact, sorry, it's underway. Yeah. And presuming that that goes ahead and gets a positive vote, then in April of next year, Part 3 will be published. Now, for our national annexes, we have already, for Eurocode 7, we have already issued for public comment the National Annex to Eurocode 7 Part 2. So those extracts I've shown you are out in the public domain waiting for comment. It's a pretty short National Annex. And again, if that gets approval, that will be published next month, and Eurocode 7 Part 2 will be operational in the UK from the end of November. I'll talk about coexistence in a moment. For Part 1, we have a draft National Annex. Unfortunately, we're waiting for the structural guys to decide what to do with design service life in the UK, whether to go to the 50-year period or stick with the traditional UK 60 years. And the other thing is how to deal with consequence classes and consequence factors. So there's a debate, and we have differences of opinion between our Highways Authority, our railways, Geotechnics, and we're having a big input to that. And basically, we're waiting for the structural guys to make their mind up what they want to do before we can publish what we want to do. So I'm not sure when that will be ready. We're pushing very hard to get that out. So we've actually got an operational Eurocode 7 Part 1. And at the same time, we've got a group of, I don't know how many people, probably 100 people involved in total on various subcommittees who are working now on the National Annex for Part 3. And my hope, as chair of the committee, is that by the time that Part 3 is published, we will have a draft that can go out for public consultation. That would be my hope. We'll see whether we achieve that or not. I have to say that some members of our committee appear to be trying to open old wounds and go back to design before the Eurocodes, so we got those usual battles coming up. In terms of going forward from there, obviously from when these get published until 2028, so 2028 is when the first generation Eurocodes must be withdrawn. So between then and the end of the bar, we're going to have two sets of Eurocodes. And the question is, what will the designer do? Well, what's going to happen is we're going to keep the first generation in place, and we're going to have a coexistence period. It's exactly what happened with the first generation. There was a coexistence period. It means that if you're working on a project, it's a long-term project, you may not want to change codes. If you're starting a new project, you might want to go to the new Eurocode. It'll be down to individual organisations and clients to decide what they want to do. We'll be encouraging people to adopt Eurocode 7 Part 2 as soon as possible. We don't see any detriment in doing that. For the other parts of Eurocode 7, it'll depend on other bits of the Eurocodes being available. You may not be able to do everything if we haven't got all the bits of Eurocode 2 or Eurocode 5. You know, there are several other bits that need to be in place. But certainly for software developers, they'll be able to look at this and start to amend their programs. People will start to do training, so it allows for that preparation. All of the second generation Eurocodes must be available by April 2026. Eurocode 7, we're quite early in this process. We're quite ahead of the stream. And so although the steel code is out, there's lots of other steel parts which are lagging. So the final formal vote for all second generation Eurocodes is October next year. They will all be made available by April then, and effectively this is the period when National Annexes need to be at the very latest prepared. And then all of the Eurocodes must be published by September 2027. And then finally, 2028, it's second generation or nothing. So that's the timescale. So we will have coexistence in the UK. And that's how we're tackling it in the UK. Thank you for your attention.